When you're delivering customer-facing analytics in your SaaS apps, one of the first challenges you grapple with is that your data comes from a variety of data sources. For example, you might be receiving real-time data via APIs. You may be syncing your operational systems to your data warehouse. In some instances, you may also want to consume the files that are in your data lake. Now, let's imagine you've gone ahead and created a dashboard that consolidates these insights. Now, before you integrate these insights for your end users, you must ask, how do I control what each user gets to see when they log into this app? Secondarily, how do I manage these controls effectively so I can track and govern them from a single place? This is where data isolation becomes super important. It is foundational to operationalizing and distributing insights from your data stores. This is one thing customers really like about Semaphor. With Semaphor, you can control the security and visibility at the user level, customer level, and tenant level. This means that you can ensure that every piece of data that is displayed in your app is exactly what the user is permitted to see. No more, no less. Let's go check out how.
In this example, we're looking at a sales application with 4 users. The first 3 users are the sales reps tied to their individual regions. And the last user, Liam, is the country sales leader, and he has access to sales data for all US states. Now let's first go ahead and log in as Liam. As you can notice, Liam can see the average profit for all the US states. When we go to the Explorer view, you would notice that Liam has not only access to sales data, but he can also see listings table, also has access to all the columns for the sales data table. Now let's log out and log back in, this time as Oliver, who happens to be the sales rep for East and should only have access to New York, Connecticut, and Florida. Sure enough, you can see that Liam's view is restricted to Connecticut, Florida, and New York, the states that he's supporting. Moreover, when we go into the Explorer view, we would notice that Oliver has access to only sales data table. In addition, he only has access to the columns that his policy allows. Now, how does Semaphor do this? Within Semaphor project, you can create a row and column level policies. In this example, we've created one policy called state. And if you look at this policy, it accepts the parameter called state, and it makes sure that any user that carries this policy can see all the columns except for the discount columns. And that's what we notice when we log in as Oliver here. Oliver does not have access to the discounts column. But if we log back in as Liam Johnson, who is the country sales leader, he should see the discount column in addition to everything else, like so.
Now you might ask, how do you propagate these policies we looked at to the application where this dashboard is rendered? So now I'm at my code editor and we're looking at the demo dashboard component. This component essentially uses the dashboard component from Semaphor, passes the authentication token, the dashboard ID, and renders the experience that we just saw. Now, when the user clicks on login, what we do is we take in the user ID and pass it to this server-side function called handle login. So when you go ahead and log in as, let's say, Oliver Martin, we take the user and then we call in a server-side function. So in this example, for the login user function, you might do some sort of authentication here. Once the user is authenticated, based on group assignments, you can apply the row and column level policies and pass in the appropriate parameters. So in this example, we are creating 2 policies. One is the policy called state, and the second is the table level policy called sales rep. So if we go back here, there is the row and column level policy called state, and we also have the table level policy called sales rep. So any sales rep that carries this policy is only allowed to see the sales data table and nothing else. And with these policies, we call the function to fetch the token. The fetch user token effectively calls in the Semaphor token API with the policies. And this token is then given back to the component and pass it on to our dashboard component.
Now that's at the row, column, and table level. But what if you wanted to isolate your data at the connection level, which means switching a database connection based on the tenant or routing a tenant to a specific location in your data lake. In this example, let's say you have a tenant-based setup where you have a dedicated folder for each one of your tenants, like so. We have a tenant A folder that receives the data for tenant A, underscore B folder receives the data for tenant B, underscore C folder receives the data for tenant C. You can easily express this pattern as your connection policy. So in Semaphor console, I have created a store policy, which is my connection level policy. And you can parameterize the URL as the location for this particular connection. And now I can use the tenant parameter to generate a tenant specific token. Let's see that in action. Here in my application, I have tenant A, B, and C buttons. Right now, the dashboard is rendering data for all the tenants. And when we render the dashboard with the token for tenant A, we can see the dashboard is restricted to tenant A only. Similarly, we can generate a token for tenant B, and the dashboard loads with data for tenant B. And similarly for tenant C. That's how easily you can use the connection level policies, table level policies, row and column level policies to precisely control what your users can see when they log into the application.